I hope that it'll be a blessing to you. Now, for those of you who are watching, or maybe will be watching in the future, we will be utilizing a book, and the name of the book is called Barron's American Sign Language. And in fact, I'll grab a copy that I have right here in front of me and hold it up for you, big and tall. And that way you can see what it looks like there. Those on the camera, you can zoom into that there so they can see what they're looking at there. Barron's American Sign Language, a comprehensive guide to ASL 1 and 2, and is what it is by David A. Stewart and Jennifer Stewart. And so that's going to be our curriculum here. And the goal of this class is for us to be able to, obviously we're going to want to learn the alphabet, things like that, but we want to be able to communicate. Whether you come to this church, you go to another church, oftentimes you'll have somebody in your church that they're deaf. And it's really sad, but most people can't communicate. I think it's wonderful when the church body knows at least enough to be able to have small talk with somebody. My goal is to be able to, by the time this course is over, be able to have that small talk. And for me personally, and if I have to do extra study, I will. I want to be able to almost lead someone to Christ who's deaf. Certainly, I want to be able to invite them to church. And I remember when Andrew findeth his own brother Simon Peter and brought him to Christ. Andrew didn't know enough to be able to lead someone to Christ, but he said, I know someone who can. And so he said, if I could just get them there. So if nothing else, I want to at least be able to get them to church so that they can hear the sermon interpreted in their language. It's so very, very important. Sign language is, from what I was told, is the most spoken language around the world collectively. And so this is pretty important for us to learn. I'm thankful that we have a wonderful sign language ministry here at the church. And so one of our deacons here at the church is Brother Jacob Roth. And he's also a missionary. And we're so thankful for him and how the Lord has called him. So in a moment after I pray, we're going to turn it over to him. And we are going to get into our class tonight. And so I hope you'll join us every Tuesday night at 6:30. If you can't come here in person, like several people are here tonight, you can always watch there on the internet. And so we hope that you'll choose to do one or the other. But we're going to gather in prayer and ask the Lord to bless. Are there any prayer requests here for those that are in our audience? Anything pertinent that we need to pray for before we ask the Lord to bless Brother Jacob here? All right. Well, then let's pray, and then we'll dive right in. Brother Jacob will come. And then each night, I guess we'll find out tonight about how long do you think each night's going to be. We'll find out tonight, and then we'll go from there, okay? All right, so get ready. Let's pray together. Dear Lord, I sure do love you. Thank you, dear Lord, for your many wonderful blessings. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be able to come and learn this very important language. Father, I pray that you'll help us to be a blessing to those who are without hearing, those who are mute. Father, I pray that you'll help us to learn, to retain these things, and that we might be able to use it for your glory. And Lord, what a blessing it would be to be able to, if we had a church family here that was pretty good at sign language, what a blessing that would be to the whole deaf community, and how welcoming they would feel. So Lord, I pray that you'll help us with that and speak to our hearts tonight. Use us, and we'll thank you for what you're going to do. Be with Brother Jacob. Pray that you'll fill him with the Holy Spirit's power and give him the words this evening. We love you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Brother Jacob, I will turn it over to you, my friend.
So, loud. Is that better? All right, so I printed out a syllabus. That way, at least, you guys will know what we're going to try to cover each week. And that way you can practice at home. You've got the curriculum, you've got the book. So you know what we're going to cover the next week. And you kind of look over that at your house, because there's going to be a lot of practicing. If you're not going to practice a foreign language, you're not going to learn the foreign language, right? You've got to practice it, which means you've got to cover there's a lot of vocabulary in here. A lot of words you got to memorize. And as we get older, it's harder to memorize those things. You know, there's a couple of youngins in here. They'll breeze right through it, like, have it all down. But it's the older people are going to take a couple of weeks to get it down, right, Brother Joel? All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover this, and as I was thinking, we're going to go through lessons 1 and 2 today. We're also going to cover our ABCs, which we got to start at the basics, ABC, all that's important. But I was thinking to myself I remember when I was first starting to learn sign language, I thought to myself, why? Why am I trying to learn sign language? What is the reason behind it? And there was a verse that God brought to me. It's in 1 Peter. It said, be ready always to give an answer to every man, to ask you the reason, right? So when I was thinking of that to myself, I was like, if somebody was deaf and they were to ask me, why do I believe what I believe, could I ever explain it? Could I sign it? And so I took the opportunity to learn sign language. I wanted to learn it because I wanted to be able to answer. I wanted to be ready always to give that answer. Now, the verse means a lot of other things than that, but that was just the one thing that kind of hit me with that. It's like, I need to be ready, right? I want to make sure that I'm ready. And I hope someday Preacher has a Spanish class here, because I would love to I want to sit in here. I want to learn how to witness to somebody in Spanish. I'll be ready. That's, to me, it's I got to be ready. I want to be ready to do that when the opportunity presents itself. And the other reason is because I believe the way to somebody's heart is through their language. And when I want to witness to somebody, I can witness in any language. That's true. I use the Bible. I can witness to somebody in any language. But there's sometimes a barrier that when I'm trying to talk to somebody, they speak Spanish naturally. I speak English. I can get my point across kind of, but if I were to be able to do that in Spanish, there's a barrier that gets removed. There's an acceptance there. They're like, oh, they took the time to learn my heart language, and they took the time to learn that. I'm going to give them a little time to actually pay attention and listen to them. And I found the same thing happen with sign language. When I said, I hand somebody a track that was deaf. The first thing was like, oh, no, it's okay. But then I start signing. They're like, whoa, okay, I'm going to stop and listen to you now. You took the time to learn my heart language. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. And you get that opening where a lot of times things get cut off immediately. So why do we want to learn sign language? Because I want to be ready, but I want to be ready to present the gospel. So part of what we're going to cover here, you see in your syllabus, is we're going to cover the Romans road specifically through these classes. Most of you should already have all these verses memorized, which is one of the reasons I picked them, because most of us should have those verses already memorized. We've looked over it 1,000,000 times. And now we're going to look at those verses in the context of sign language. What are the signs that go along with those verses? How would I sign it? And then how would I make it understandable? Because we got to understand is deaf people didn't grow up in church like we did. And a lot of times some of those words don't mean the same thing to them as they do to us. So we got to make sure we're clear when we're presenting the gospel to the deaf. So that's part of what we're going to cover through these verses. And then we're going to cover dialogue and how to have a conversation and all that fun stuff. All right, so when we open a book in chapter 1, we get what is ASL? ASL is American Sign Language. So to be very clear, this is the sign language used in America. There is a sign language used in every country in the world, and they're not the same. Now, there's some commonalities between French Sign Language and American Sign Language, because a lot of the guys that came to America and helped develop American Sign Language were from France, Leclerc and Gaudet and that kind of stuff. So we have an American Sign Language that's completely different. And then we understand also that every region in America has a different signs in American Sign Language. Hearing people would kind of call them accents, but in sign language, some signs are just a little bit different. Here in Florida, this was the word for faith. Faith. We moved to Virginia, and I was interpreting, and I said faith. And they went, that's Florida sign. I said, okay, what's the sign here? They said faith. Okay. So who was right? They're right. It's their language. Right? I'm hearing. It's not my language. It's their language. It's their region. They said it's this way. I changed. I used their sign. So when we understand it's not, if you're going to learn American Sign Language, you're learning it, and you're going to see some differences as you cross the country here, and as you talk to different people, many different differences. Go with the flow. It's okay. That they can understand you pretty clearly, because if they understand you well enough to give you the right sign, then they understood you, right? but use their sign, and we go on, and we different parts of sign language. So American Sign Language, we learn it here. You're not going to be able to use it in England. You're not going to be able to use it in Germany. Not really. It's different, okay? And then the parts of ASL. What are the different parts of ASL that we were going to cover? And we got a lot in here. You see this book's really big, all right? So when you talk about parts of it, we got the first part is just the straight up words. What are the words in sign languages, right? So words. Those are signs, sign language, and words. We're going to learn all those different words. And there's lots and lots of words. So as we learn vocabulary, you're going to be learning all those different words. You're going to understand that, like me, there are words I don't know yet in signs. We talked about the other day, like chlorophyll. Most of us know what chlorophyll is. There's no sign for that I know of. So now I have to learn how to spell, which is terrible because I'm a terrible speller. So I have to learn how to do that. But you know what? I may go into a place and I may sign chlorophyll because that's what the pastor said, is he said chlorophyll. I don't know why. That was part of the message, but he said chlorophyll. I've got to sign chlorophyll. I sign it. I explain what it is, and somebody out there goes, oh, that's this. I just learned a new sign. And I've got to be open and receptive to that and go, okay, I'll add it to my vocabulary. I've got to learn that sign now. But the first part is words. The second is concepts. In sign language, we don't necessarily do a word-to-word variation of what English does. English says, I want to go to the store. Sign language says, I go store. I'm leaving out articles. I'm leaving out thes. I'm leaving out, a lot of times, ands are left out. And so I'm actually talking about concepts now. So I make sure when I'm signing something, when we're even having a conversation with a deaf person, they're going to leave out a lot of words. In fact, when I was interpreting a class at college, and I asked the deaf girl, I said, how do you spell so fast? She said, I leave out the vowels. Every time she spelled something, she left all the vowels out, unless it started with a vowel. And I'm like, that just confused me, because here I am hearing, you don't leave vowels out. Those are very important to understanding what the word means. But when you read, you can read a word without vowels. You don't think that, but when you look at a word, you can see, oh, I know what that word is. You think the word black, you leave the A out, B-L-C-K. What did I say? But you would read that and you'd recognize it. So you got to understand that's a concept now. We're not doing word-for-word things. We're doing more concepts. Concepts in spelling, concepts in signs, concepts in sentences. And we get into it, we also have the next thing, which is called classifiers. So when we do a concept, we're going to be using something called a classifier. A classifier is like a cup, right? This is not actually the sign for cup, a drink. But that's the concept here, and it's a classifier. If I say plate, and then if I say stack of plates. So that's not really signs, those are classifiers. So what I'm doing is I'm defining a concept. And so when you're thinking conceptually, now I have classifiers, two people walking together. That's not really the sign. When you sign it, you say two people walking together. I just changed it all to a concept in a classifier. So we have that kind of concept, and we have classifiers that fulfill concepts, and then we have space. All right? I know this. If it gets confusing, that's fine. Raise your hand. We'll slow it down a little bit. But space is here, 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 over there, versus here, versus here, versus here, versus there. A lot of signs will have different places in space that they have to be signed in. All right, and if you change the space, you change the meaning of the sign. All right, so the sign for dad. Dad. All right, so Shannon, when she was growing up, signed it this, which means dumb. Always. Dumb. I'm like, stop it. It's dad. Dumb. So it's dad. Dad's like this. But if I change the space of that sign and put it here, that's mom. Because I changed the space of it, I changed the meaning of the word. Now, here, here, and I put it here. What's this mean? kid. That's good. It means fine. I'm fine. How you doing? Fine. So now, dad, mom, fine. Same hand shape, same orientation of the hand, but space changed. So you got to make sure when we look at that, that spacing is very important, how a sign is interpreted to the person looking at it. And then we have hand orientation. Okay? So, dad, this is something different. Same hand shape, but I've changed the orientation of my palm, and it changed the sign. This means mine. This means yours. Same hand shape, orientation of the palm, same space, but the orientation changed. That changed the sign. So now, right, words, concepts. We have the space, hand orientation, classifiers. Okay? Now, we still have more. You ready? You ready? I know it's a lot here. This is a big introduction, but I want to make sure I lay it all out so we understand what we're going to go through. Okay? The next thing is what's called facial grammar. Your face plays a big part in the grammar that you're going to be doing. You think of it this way, your face is your punctuation. Exactly. Your face is whether you put a quotation mark around something or whether you put a question mark at the end of it or an exclamation point, your face does all that. Your face also registers tone. Are you going to do monotone, or are you going to be excited, or are you going to be quiet? You're going to be reserved, shy. Your face does all of that. And parts of the face, we got expressions, right? We have eyes. Your eyes are a big part of it. Where your eyes are looking at any given point, it's part of your interpreting or part of your signing. So when I have a conversation, I look you in the face, but I want you to look at something that's important. I change my eyes here and put them back. So what I've done is I've told you to look here. This is important. All that's added into this conversation. So we're going to be learning all these things. Head movement is all part of it. I can say, I go to the store. If I leave my head straight, I go store. I've just made a statement. If I say, I go store, that means I really wanted to go to the store. If I say, I go store, I just said I don't want to go to the store. So same signs with my hands, same spacing, same orientation, all of that, but what happened with the word, the sentence changed because of my head movement. So all that's going to be added in. I know. And then we got body movement. All right? So when we think about body movement, we're thinking about the way I move over here. I'm setting a stage, or I move over this way. Those will actually change who I'm talking about. A lot of my subject will change by turning my body. I'm talking about this thing over here, now I'm talking about that thing over there. So a lot of times my subject will change by body movement. If I'm talking quietly, my hands will come in closer. If I'm being loud, my hands get out loud. My hands go wider. A lot of this is body movement. So now we're talking about volume, about how big my hands get. When preacher's preaching, I'm way out here a lot. Right? I'm out here, my hands get tired because we're always out here. He barely whispers anything, right? But if we whisper, I'm going here, and I'm going to whisper. It's very small, concise. So now I'm talking about volume of my sign. And a lot of times that will change based off how big of a place you're interpreting in or signing in. But when just normal conversation, this is basically volume. So, knowing all that, one of the first things you have to do if you want to sign is stop being self-conscious. Because in your mind, you're going to look silly. Because you know what you're doing. And you're making sure that you're putting facial expressions on your face and you're overemphasizing it. And you're like, this looks ridiculous. But you can't do that. You can't worry about that. Because you're trying to get the point of the sentence across. You have to make sure you're okay with looking silly. I remember we were doing a big conference, and they put me up on the big screen. And I got nervous because I already felt self-conscious because I'm interpreting and I have big movements and I'm a big guy and I'm making big facial expressions, and then now I'm on the big screen behind me, like a big screen behind me. Like 5,000 seat auditorium, and they put up this big screen, and it's like me. They put me up there. I'm like, no, but I have to get out of here. And it's like and people like looking at it. And you see it in church, you'll see people stare over this way all the time. It's because I'm moving. I'm making weird facial expressions. I am sometimes making noises. And as you learn some of these signs, there are noises attached to the sign because that's how your mouth is supposed to move. And deaf people will make these noises so they don't hear it. So they don't know they're making this. But that's a mouth movement that is added for emphasis on certain signs. And they'll make that noise and not realize they're making that noise. And a lot of times, if you're up here signing, if you forget where you are and what you're doing, you'll make that same noise. And it might startle you, but that's okay. Or I'm signing and I do that, and I don't mean to do it. I'm trying to make sure to focus not to do that when preacher's preaching, because I don't want to pull more attention to myself. But sometimes it happens, and I have to get out of my self-consciousness, because if I do this and suddenly I freeze up, they're going to miss part of what I'm trying to say. And yes, we may be in a restaurant, and I may be giving the gospel, and I do this, and I and I freeze up, and then everybody in the crowd looks at me like this, and then I'm done. Right? I stop. They're like, oh, okay. Well, have a nice day. You're done. Why? Because you got in your head, you got self-conscious about making loud noises, about making popping sounds, hands, all this kind of stuff. Don't worry about it. You are going to look ridiculous, but that's the point. I look ridiculous. You may look silly. Go with that. But I know I look ridiculous making some of that. I remember, signing to a lady, and she goes, I love your facial expressions. You look just like my uncle. And I was like, I hope he's handsome. I don't know. I still don't know. But she liked the facial expressions because it reminded her of her uncle. But that's what I have to make sure I do that. I make the facial expressions. And when we get to interpreting, I'm trying to make the same facial expressions that the preacher's tone is conveying. And that gets to another whole level. So we don't have to worry about that till next semester or whatever semester we have interpreting. But, that gets a little bit harder. But right here, when we're having a conversation, you want to make sure that get out of your own head. Don't worry about being self-conscious. Don't focus on you're going to make noises, because if you do it right, you should be making noises. All right. Now we're going to do a practice activity real quick. So we talked about what the biggest part of sign language outside of signs is facial expressions. So I want to see if you guys can do that. Yeah? All right, so can you do an excited face? Well, that's stunned. That looks more like scared. Excited, it's Christmas morning. Yeah, more. Come on, you can do it. Well, Brother Joel, I didn't see yours. What's excited? All right, if I bring my truck washed? Facial expression. There, see, that's it. Excited. Surprised. That's another good one. Or what is a sad face? Okay. Well, that's a puppy dog face. That's good. You got a sad face. Now, you think about this. Sad like, I feel bad for you, sad. And then I lost my parent, sad. Now you have a whole different level of sad on your face. If you can get you can feel that emotion I lost my dad. That conveys something. And it's gotten to a point where if you let your heart and let the Holy Spirit work through you and you allow that emotion to come out while you're signing, you have tears flowing down your face. You don't even know why. Because that emotion is part of the grammar. And I want them to feel that. So here I can give a tone. I can get louder and, this is important. You need to pay attention. I can't do that in sign language. It's here. This is how I get my point across. All right, so we've done happy. Happy. All right, so now I want you to try something with just your eyes. I know most parents should be able to do this. Can you say, come here with just your eyes? Oh, that's pretty good. His has go away. But so your eyes, with your eyes too, you have, again, you're widening, you're looking, your eyebrows are all part of that. I know Ethan can move his eyebrows all around. It's real. I can't do that. I can flex my nostrils so I can look angry. But there's nothing wrong with that, because what that does is adds to the emotional facial structure, the grammar I'm trying to present. And I want it to be, we think about it in here, we have nice acoustics. And we feel the sound all around us. And we get the feeling of that in stereo. This is stereo for the deaf. The less facial movement I have, the less emotion I show on my face, the more monotone my interpreting is, the more monotone my conversation is. The more I put here, the more stereo it is. So yeah, it may sound ridiculous that you flexed your nostrils, because preachers like banging on the pulpit like he's angry. I'm going to flex my nostrils and I'm going to change. Why? Because I'm trying to make sure I convey that emotion. It's going to be through my face. All right, we have head movements. So everybody knows how to nod yes. We'll practice that. We know how to nod no. All right, can you nod maybe? It's to the side, right? Yeah, you can do so we got it, good. All right, and then we have body movements. So in sign language, there's set spacing that's already been set. To the right is God. To the left is everything bad. World, Satan, devil, right? God is in heaven, so he's up. Satan is on earth, so he's here, and hell is down. So kind of the body movements and spacing that we look at. So when I'm talking about God, I turn over here. I don't know if you noticed, but when we pray, I turn this way in my chair, and I pray this way. And I pray with my hands up slightly. Why? Because I'm conveying with my body movement, I am praying to God. When he talks about hell, I go down over here. And I'll bend over, and it's down. I want to make sure that's clear. Sin is in the middle because we all have it. It's all here. We're all together in that sin. But sin will send you to hell. Being saved, you go to heaven. So all this body movement conveyed some information of what we're talking about. And sometimes you got to make sure when you set those things up, because if you're going over here and you're talking about hell, and they've been in church, they're like, why is it on heaven's side? Right? So we got to make sure our body movements and all that kind of stuff is all worked out. And so, yes.
When you're there, and the audience that's deaf is looking at you, you're going to your right?
Yes.
All right, yeah, you're not trying to mirror it for them.
No, I'm not trying to mirror it for them.
So they will get it.
They will get that it's on my right. And remember, everything they do is visual. So for them, it's very easy for spatial to realize what's right, what's left, what's on my right, what's on their left. So they're very easy with that. All right, so in this book, which as preacher shows, American Sign Language, there's something called English gloss. All right, and the way the sentences are written in here are in what they call English gloss. So it's going to sound weird as you read it. But let me grab a sentence here. You pick on me, why you? All right, that's English gloss. What they did is they took the signs that you're going to sign and wrote the English equivalent for it in the order that you would have signed it. And then if you look inside, it'll have a parenthesis that says, why are you picking on me? That would be the English equivalent. That's what we're saying. But what you're going to sign is you pick on. Why you? And so you'll notice I have a hard time doing it. It's called simul communication, SIMCOM, where you're signing and talking at the same time. And I have a hard time with that because it's two different languages that are happening in your brain at the same time. And if I said at there, I didn't sign it. Because at is not a sign word. So I signed same time. What my brain wanted to say, and with my words, I sign different languages same time. Because that would be glossing. All right, so as you read those, understand that's what's happening here. It's not to confuse you. It's sign word you would have signed in the order you should have signed it to get the English equivalent. If you hear a deaf person speak, they have a higher tone and all that kind of stuff because they can't hear themselves, but they speak in English gloss. Deaf, text you in English gloss. You'll get words left out, and you just have to, if they're signing, read it as if it was sign words. And then it'll help you understand what they're trying to say. And as you get more proficient with sign language, you can read a deaf gloss, and it'll be fine. You understand what they're talking about. If you hear them speak, sometimes when I have to voice, and I don't do it very well, SimCom, I'll swap to English gloss as I'm voicing and I'm signing. And it happens. It sounds weird. You look at the person. No, you do. It's just I'm saying the sign word instead of the English equivalent and adding in all the articles that I left out. And I'm swapping it around in context because I'm putting my time first and then the subject, comment, and all verbs, all different. And we're going to learn all that grammatical stuff too. All right? So when you go through this book, understand when you get to that sign gloss, all those words written that way, don't get confused, don't get frustrated. It's just the sign written that way to help you understand what you're trying to sign. All right? All right, so in the next page, we talk about the history. We're on page 3 of the book. We're talking about the history of sign language. It has a very long history, but also a very short history. Sign language has really only been around for about 60 years. It's not a long time. It has, for us, it seems long because, we're talking about, Thomas Edison was involved in this stuff. And, Gallaudet, we now have Gallaudet College up in D.C., where it's a prominent deaf college up there. And Leclerc, Laurent Clerc, and Gallaudet, all these people that came in and developed the sign language. But it's really a short history. So when we think about it, we have American Sign Language. That is the deaf's language. That is their culture. All right? And as we think about it, we know that culture is based off your language. All right? So English, we have an English culture. We have an American culture, even though we're English. We have English speaking, but we have an American culture because our English is a certain way. You go to England, also speak English, but they speak it differently, and their culture is different. You probably see in Poland too, right? Culture is built around that language. As you learn the language, you learn the culture. And the same thing with sign language. This is their language, and we're coming into their culture. But it's also a pretty flexible language right now. All right, so we got 60 years in. We have some pretty set standard signs, right? Yes and no. That's pretty standard. Father, mother. Those are pretty standard. Right and wrong. Kids, because he's got snotty nose. Kids. And a lot of sign is based off pictures. All right, you think about this. Girl. Why is it this? Well, you go 60 years ago, girls wore what? Bonnets. Boys wore what? Baseball caps. So signs are a lot of time are wrapped around pictures of things that were happening at the time. And so, those are pretty set. But there also are flexible things that are still coming about. Internet is new. Email. Let me ask you this. What's this? Telephone. If you ask anybody under the age of 14 what this is, they won't know. Right? We've seen the videos. Haven't you seen the videos? They say it's this. Why? Because that's how phones are now. Most houses don't even have this anymore. So if you ask a deaf teenager, hey, can I call you? They're like, oh, call me. That's now becoming flexible. Should we change to this? Now you got the older deaf going, well, should we change to this? Because now technologically that is phones, because that's what we're trying to say, and younger kids don't know what this is anymore. Why is this associated with a phone? They don't know. So it's becoming a little flexible, but there are some standards. But we understand it's their language. We don't come up with signs for them. What we can do is say, like for me, I like the sign redeemed like this. And the reason is because I believe redeem means to be bought back. This means to buy. And Jesus paid my price. He bought me out of sin. He paid for my debt. so he redeemed me. Now, most deaf sign it like this, which means saved. Conceptually, that's what's happening, right? I'm redeemed, I'm saved. Technically, the words mean something different. But I'm hearing, they're deaf. It's their language, not mine. So what I can do is say, hey, what do you think about this sign for redeemed? They're like, why? Now I explain the concept of redeemed. Some like it, some don't. What will happen is they'll now have a conversation amongst themselves, and this is hilarious to watch. They'll argue over what sign is best, and then they'll come to a consensus, and they'll let you know. And then you use the sign they told you to use. It's their language. So there's words that's flexible, so we have to be flexible because some words will change over periods of time. Some words are added. Like every 4 years, or hopefully every 4 years, we get a new president. The president's sign name is different every time, and it changes. When Obama was first elected, it was Obama. Right? Obama. Now, this means president, but this means rebellion. So his sign was rebellion. And then Trump was, because of his hair. But we had, we had to be flexible. Okay, what's the sign for this? I'll spell the word out. Give me the sign. I'll ask the deaf in the new area I go to, what's the sign for this? Because I don't know that sign. I know a gentleman up in the North America up here in Maine and Pennsylvania, all that. He's doing books of the Bible differently than I've ever seen them. Daniel, Matthew, or things like that sort. I haven't seen like Luke. This is how I've signed Luke. This is how I've signed Daniel. I've signed Bible names based off the name of the person. Luke, Peter, Paul, Daniel. I've signed it like that. And he does it differently up there. Why? Because the deaf up there sign it differently. So if I were to go up there and interpret, I would have to say, I would go like this, or what is that? Peter. Oh, it's signed like this, Peter. Oh, okay, then I would change my sign. And so we have to be flexible when we're having a conversation. You're maybe in the middle of the conversation, and the deaf person will stop you and go, what does that mean? Be ready for that. Spell it out. That's just why we have to learn spelling. Spell it out, and they'll give you the sign, and I go on with that sign. And like I said, sometimes they'll have a little conversation right there and discuss things. One recent was COVID. I saw COVID signed many different ways, starting when COVID first came out. I saw it many different ways. Then I saw a narrowing down of COVID, and now it's COVID. And now everybody uses that sign. That means COVID now. Why? The best sign won, in a sense. Not the best sign the hearing people told them to have, but the best sign they decided to have amongst themselves. And they'll see it on a video. Oh, I like that way, that sign, and they'll incorporate it. They'll bring it to their deaf group, and another conversation and discussion, and they'll decide, and that we move on with that sign. So when we look at sign language, understand it's flexible. They're not set words for everything you know. You're going to have to be flexible, saying, okay, it's a little different here, it's a little different here. It may be a completely different word over there. Just be ready for that. All right. So signing is, we in page 4, we're on page 4. We as English speakers, we use sign language a lot. I don't know if you've noticed, but specifically, if you're Italian, you use sign language a lot. Your hands are always moving. I don't know if, I've seen that. We use sign language all the time. When you look at your kid, you're like you're on the phone. It's not shh, or, we all use sign language. But in hearing world, we use sign language in a very minimal way. All right? It is a very childish way, in a sense. And when we think about sign language, sometimes we think about it in a way that says, well, I've seen sign language. It's just with your hands. How much can you actually convey? How much information am I actually getting across? So I want to show you a video. You got that? This guy, this was at DBFA this year, Deaf Baptist Bible Fellowship of America. His name is Randy Dignan. He's a CODA. Now, CODA means Child of Deaf Adults. So both mom and his dad are deaf. He grew up in a deaf home. His sister's deaf. I think it's just him and his brother Nick, the only two that were hearing in the whole household. And so he grew up with sign language. And he is preaching at DBFA. And we're going to watch this muted. You got that muted, bud? We're going to watch this muted. And what I want you to do is watch what he's saying. And see if you can think about in your head, what do you think he's talking about? And then I'll ask you, if you can kind of, from his gestures, if you can figure out what he's talking about. How much information do you think he's conveying? What kind of sermon do you think he's actually be able to preach? And then I also want you to watch his body movements, his facial expressions. Because you'll notice he's going to do that a lot. And I've seen this guy do cartwheels on the stage in the middle of a sermon while he's signing. I don't know why. I can't do it. He's a little bit older than me, but he can still do those. So we're going to watch this real quick. It's about 1 minute and 15 seconds. I want you to, see if you can figure out what he's saying. I'll ask you afterwards. And then look at his hand movements and his facial expressions and his body movements. All of it's going to be wrapped up into this. All right, give it a shot. All right. No. He's punctuating a lot. But he didn't use really complex signs.
And that's really slow for him.
And that's actually really pretty slow for him. I hate voicing for this guy because he can get picked up. But if you look at that, there wasn't a lot of big signs. Okay, this wasn't a lot of complex signs. What do you think he was talking about?
I think he was preaching on Matthew chapter 16 where the Lord said, I will build my church. Based upon the top left corner says, I will build my church. Otherwise, I have no clue. I saw old a lot. He kept
So
saying
old?
Old, over and over again. And I saw Lord and I saw Christ. But I didn't see enough to tell me what he's preaching.
If you watched, you see, he says old like that, right? But you also watch him, he slowed it down.
Oh, it's the sign of Biden.
Oh,
Old and slow.
Biden. No, but I'm on the internet. I better not do that. But he slowed certain things down. He sped certain things up. He spelled certain words. The. He spelled it twice. Why? For emphasis. He also spelled it for emphasis, and there's no sign for the. He had to spell it. So you look at his facial expressions. He talked about, you saw him, right? You saw that. You saw, and you can't hear it, but he is very loud, big gestures. And then you saw him bend over, right? All that was part of it. So what he's talking about is tearing things down, and you can't build until you first tear down. All right, so you rewind that back. Go ahead and play it again. Let's watch this with the volume.
Pride, the old Jewish criticisms, and waiting to hear the beautiful words, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, okay, I'm ready to build my church now. You see, the problem with many of us today is we want to build something for God, but we haven't even torn down some things first. You can't build on something that needs to be torn down. Remember the Old Testament, God was mad with Israel, and God told Israel, you have these high places. You have to tear down these high places. You have to remove the worship of false gods. You have to remove those old worldly ways and those worldly influences. And remember, David went and got the Ark of the Covenant and went to bring it back to Israel, and he was so excited about it. And he took the world's ways, and he put it on a cart. And as they were taking it along on that cart, that wasn't God's way. And when the cart hit something, it stumbled, and a man reached out, touched it, and got struck dead immediately. And David was like, whoa. He was smote in his heart right away, and he went to the law, and he looked.
That voice is not his voice. Somebody's voicing for him. All right, and so that's the good thing you picked up on it, because like I was talking about sim calming, well, a lot of what he did is conceptual stuff, so it's very hard for him to say, like the cart thing like this. This is not a sign. He put it on a cart, and he just rode along. So what he signed was a cart or horse buggy type thing with the ropes. What he conveyed was he just put it on the cart like no big deal. He's just going along. Everything's fine. That's what he signed, but that's what he said with his sign. So when you look at that, you see very big movements. You see emphasis. He bends over when he's trying to get that point across. He slows down certain signs. He spells other certain signs. He was. He was glossing. Yes. What you heard is somebody else voicing for him. So what he was doing was glossing with his words. So when you see his mouth moving, he's saying the signs that he's signing. And like when he went this, he closed his mouth. Why? Because that wasn't a sign. That was a classifier. That's not really a sign. It's a concept. You can't say a word for a concept. It's a whole bundle of things. But what he was doing is with his mouth moving, he was glossing. Why was he glossing? Because he wants to get some deaf people read lips. And they don't know signing that good. So he's making sure he's doing this really big, and he's glossing those words, so when they see that and they see the hands, they can put it together, and they get the full story. And you want to make sure that you do that, because I had a problem with this when I started. I didn't use my lips a lot, and I kept getting hammered on that. Use your lips. Say the words. So I over-enunciate everything. Why? Because I want to make sure it's very clear if they can only read my lips. They don't understand sign that well. I'm going to say every word that I'm signing like that. He does that very well. The guy behind him, he's pretty good at voicing, but he didn't put in a lot of the emphasis that Randy was showing. So you felt what he was talking about. He goes, you have to tear it down. This even is not even a sign. But you kind of get the idea, because he's saying take it all and just tear it down. Why? It's a high place. He put it up here, and then he tore it all down. So this is a very complex message we got there. I mean, that's full preaching. And he did it in sign language. It didn't look like a lot, but it really was a complex language. So when we think about it and we go into this, just make sure that you understand this is not just like waving your arms about. It's not about being beautiful. Sign and music and sign can be very pretty. It's not about showing people how beautiful it can be or how big it can be or how fluent you can get. And, look at me. It's not about that. It's about conveying a message. And he conveyed a message with very minimal sign, a lot of concepts, a lot of classifiers, but everything he really used to get his point across was facial expression, body movement, and that emphasis he put into it. And that's what we need to make sure we're doing. It's not about so much how complex I can be. I can be super complex when I sign, but that doesn't make a point. And sometimes I'm signing to low-level deaf where they don't understand those words. I've just missed an opportunity because I wanted to look good. It's not about that. It's about making sure I'm clear and they're understanding what I'm saying. And so when we do that, we don't understand, sign language to us as hearing people seems like a very low-level language. Yeah, we do this thing at home. We can get a point across, but we can't get a complex thought across. But understand in sign language, you can get complex thoughts across. And so don't think about it in your head, I gotta lower what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to present the gospel, and I'm going to lower it down just because my sign, I think, has to be lower. No. You can be very clear about the salvation message. And you can be very clear with preaching. It's about how you present it, and it's about this and body movement, about getting that emphasis across. So, you can see up here, facial expressions was a big part of what he did. And then you see a lot of orientation with his hands. All right, so if you did, let's see, this here is what, Tammy, do you remember? The sign. This sign is yard. Grass. If I do it here, that's garbage. It's also cabbage. If they didn't get that wrong. So, cabbage, yard, right? But you look, the hand shape here is all the same. I'm using the same hand shape. So I want to make sure, when you're looking at ASL and you're being aware about all the different things we do, facial expressions, hand shapes, all that kind of stuff, we make sure are aware of where we're putting those things. So, next page. So, beginning of sign language started, again, we talked about it about 6 years ago. So, there's a lot of things that are coming across into now times, and we need to make sure that we're flexible with that. It's a new language. We're going to be learning a lot of signs, and sometimes those signs are going to change. I've seen younger interpreters argue with deaf people over a sign. Don't do that. It's not our language, it's their language. And we're coming into their world. And so if they say that's not the sign for it, use their sign. If you're trying to get a point across and they don't understand it, like the gospel, clarify what you're saying. Explain it a little bit more. And that will help with those situations. I've had that where I'm trying to say one thing, and they don't understand what that word means. Conceptually, some like justification. Now, if you think about justification, and sign is this, right? This means right, and I justify. That means to be made right, justify. But if I sign that to a deaf person, justify. Now, they may understand the word justify. That's the word justify. Can they explain to me what that word means? I'm justified. What does that mean? So sometimes I may be signing, and I say, we were justified. Right, amen. And then they'll say that. Amen, good. And they'll nod. But they have no idea what you just meant. So as you're going through that and you're signing, what you're looking for is something in their eyes sometimes that you see that question. Like, huh? And then they'll change and nod real quick because they don't want to look like they were stupid or they didn't understand you. So they'll hide it. But you do that, and sometimes if you can see it, if you're like, okay, I don't really feel like they got that, explain it all out. God's standard's up here. Because we've sinned, we're here. And we can't reach that. This here means equal. So God's standard's here. Standard of God here. That's perfect. I can't reach that. Why? My sin. I have to be made right. How? Jesus' blood applied to me, washes my sin away, made me right with God, justified. And so now I have to explain that out, and I now go into, so if you're going to present the gospel, it may take you a lot longer than you think it will, because sometimes you have to go over concepts that they may not just get. They may know the sign, but they may not know what the sign means. Or they may think the sign means something else. All right, so we have to do those kind of things to be careful of that. All right, so on page 8, we're talking about how signs are formed. All right, so here's where we get to some fun stuff. Handshapes are formed by one handshape, or signs are formed by one handshape. All right, so what are handshapes? When we start learning our spelling, we're going to start learning our handshapes, because handshapes are based upon the alphabet. All right, so when we look at it, if I were to say follow somebody, this is the sign for follow. This is A. A, B, C, D. So A, handshape for follow is A. A. Handshape for saved. That's S. All right? The handshape for faith is 1. It's actually 1, the number 1. Disciple, D, disciple. So when we start looking at hand shapes, what we're looking at is spelling. We're looking at the alphabet. Most hand shapes are based off an alphabet, a letter that you're going to be conveying, right? So, see, for cousin, C handshake. This is 5. Dad, mom, handshake, it's a number. So most are either based on the alphabet or based on a number. So as we start learning those, you want to make sure you keep those in your head because I say, we're going to be signing a word, sign language, number 1's, sign language, L, language. So now this is the handshake, L. If I tell you, though, we have something called a three claw. That's not based off a letter. But that's how you drive a car. It's also how you travel. 2 claw. 3 claw, park. 2 claws, travel. So some are not, but for the most part, you're going to have, a 2 claw. If I say claw, that's that. C, it's a hand shape. Complain. This is F, preach. That's the hand shape there. So all signs have a certain hand shape. Most hand shapes are going to be based off your alphabet and your number. So as we learn finger spelling and we learn our alphabet, it is very important to learn those and practice them at home. Because if you don't know your letters, you won't know your hand shapes. And if you don't know your hand shapes, you can't do signs. All right. Next is orientation. All right. So we have something called a palm orientation. We'll go back to follow again. Palm orientation. One's this way and one's that way. Palm orientation is going to be based off your primary hand. All right, so how many of you are right-handed? Everybody but Brother Jeremy. All right, so your primary hand is the hand that does the movement. Your offhand, non-primary hand, is going to be the hand that does not do movement. So in follow, primary hand, non-primary hand. So for him, it would be backwards than what we're doing. You can't do it. In your brain, it's very complex to try to swap your dominant hand to become your non-primary hand. It can be done. It's not easy to do. You can get to the point where you can sign with both hands. You see me doing that sometimes when we're interpreting, where I'm talking about something over here, and the preacher says something else, and I'm come over here and I bring that back into the conversation or something like that. So those kind of things happen, but in normal conversation, you're probably not going to have to deal with that. You got your primary hand, is your dominant hand, and that's the hand that does the movement. The other hand is the stationary hand, is the non-dominant hand. It usually does not move. All right, so follow is like that. All right, so palm orientation is going to be based off your dominant hand. So when I say follow, palm orientation is to the left. When I say dad, palm orientation, that way. For you, it would be that way. Everything's backwards for you.
We should get a video of Francis signing.
Yes, she signed left-handed, so everything was backwards. All the signs were backwards. So palm orientation here, mine, yours. That's a palm orientation. If I'm talking about travel, palm orientation is down. If I'm talking about give to God, palm orientation is up, right? So to give, my palm orientation is upwards. No, not this, this. Somebody in the back signing it completely wrong. All right, so that's orientation. Palm orientation is very important. If you change your orientation, you've changed the meaning of the word, specifically possessives. All right, so ours, mine. Yours, mine. Yours, plural. We'll get to that in a second. Mine. So there's no mine, plural. You got us and me, right? Ours. So this is, again, a possessive, but I'm including everybody, including myself. Ours, yours. So you've changed, by changing the orientation of your hand, you will change the possessive of that word and other problems, stuff like that. All right, so the location is also very important. So when you think about location of signs, we're thinking about head, shoulders, body, downwards, and then out this way, okay? And location, we see that with dad, mom, we saw that earlier, and fine. Location determines the sign, but also palm orientation there, dad, mom, grandma, or grandpa, grandma. So again, hand shape, 5, orientation, that way, and now we're adding in location, head. And the last thing we're adding in here is movement. All right, so when we add in movement, this is grandpa, grandma, dad, mom, grandpa, grandma, great grandpa, great grandma. So every extra hop you add to that, you kind of add another great to that, right? So, and that's the same thing here. So we have movement. So follow has a movement, right? It's a circular movement. This one stays stationary, circular movement behind it. That's a movement that we're going to be doing. Nice. To, something like this. So nice to meet you. So nice to meet you. So we see 5s. One's the non-dominant hand, right? The non-dominant hand's orientation's up. The dominant hand's orientation is down. Remember, the dominant hand does the movement. Nice. And location is here at the body level. All right. Because that's kind of hard to do. So we do it here. And nice is between us, right? We're talking nice to meet. Now, you can do meet like this, see? But this necessarily means two people meet. Okay? If I say nice to meet you, I'm saying I. That's me, because it's now here, me, meet you. So it changes it a little bit. Again, orientation and movement have changed that sign. So if I say nice to meet you, that is correct, it will work. The deaf person will understand that. But if I say nice to meet you, what I've said is you and I. It's you and I have met. Not just two people have met. Now it's you and I specifically. Because this is coming from me, and you are coming to me. Handshape is D, meet. If you do D too much, that's date. So you don't want to say nice to date you. Nice to meet you. It's actually number 1. Meet you. All right. So that is movement. And the last part, so there's 5 parts we're talking about here of specific signs. And this is how specifically words are formed, okay? And as we talked about earlier, we talked about ASL in general. We have facial expressions, body movement, gestures, concepts, classifiers, etc. But these are how signs are formed. There's 5 parts of how signs are formed. We talked about hand shape, orientation of the hand, the location that the sign is happening in, the movement of the sign, and the last is what's called non-manual markers. All right, so what does that mean? That's your facial expressions added to it. All right, so if I say, nice to meet you, and I added this to it, what I said is not nice to meet you. That's what I said. I negated the words I used, so I used the negative of it. All right, so when I say nice to meet you, I want to put something positive there. If I go, nice, and I do it like that, did it look like I said nice to meet you? No, it didn't. I said it with my hands, but my face said something totally different. That was like, it's not, I don't really want to meet you. That's what my face said. Or if I say, question mark, nice to meet you? That's all added to it, right? So facial expressions have a big part of how that sign and that sentence is going to be interpreted by the deaf person. So, make sure you have to smile sometimes, brother. No. You got to smile sometimes. So you got to put that in there when you sign, because if you have the lifted eyebrows, they're going to go, you don't know? You don't know it's nice to meet me? Well, I don't know if it's nice to meet you too, And so that you've conveyed that. That's the message you put across. So those are the 5 parts. You want to memorize those 5 parts. Specifically, if you're working toward credit in this class, Those are important. Hand shape, orientation, location, movement, and non-manual markers. I do want to point out there are homeschool students in this room, or they're going to be watching this, who will be taking tests on this. I would take notes. All right. So, so it's important that, they have a little ASL tip here at the bottom of page 9. Again, they're talking about mother and father, so it's important to remember all those 5 things, because each one of those 5 things, even though the sign may look the same, changing one of those things could totally change the way the word works. All right? All right, so there we have some iconic signs. These are signs that are not going to change. These are signs that have been around for a long time, and one of them is like learn, right? So conceptually, we talked about how signs came, like girl came from bonnet, boy from, that. This is a book. I take stuff out of the book, and I put it into my head. I'm learning. If I take stuff out of my head and give it to you, that's I don't know. But this, I'm taking stuff and I'm giving it to you. That's teaching. So I'm teaching and you are learning. This, I go like this, you go like that. That means you're taking it and imprinting it in your brain. Doesn't mean necessarily you're learning. It means you just went like, okay, that's too much. All right. And so there's a lot of signs like that you'll see that are specifically iconic signs. There'll be a lot of those in here that you'll learn that those signs are basically the same everywhere. Now, so tip, how to appropriately get a deaf person's attention. All right. I've seen this. Tapping on the shoulder, yes, that is number 1. But I've seen people yell. I've seen it. Hey! I was like, he can't hear you. I've seen this. No, that's not, that you can do that, but no. This here, every person in the room is looking at you. All right? You got everybody's attention. So you want to not do that specifically. So number 1 is, and these again are be on the test, so I'd write these down. Number 1 is to tap on their shoulder. Now, we have certain propriety and things of that sort. So I don't tap a lady on her shoulder. I don't. Well, I'll tap a gentleman, I'll tap his shoulder. Now, so how am I going to get a lady's attention? If I need to get her attention, I'm going to walk around the front of her and go, I wave gently. All right, or you'll have things like this. We're at a table, because they have their hands on the table or something is usually touching the table, and they'll feel the vibration, and they'll look up to see who's tapping. You generally get more than one person, but it's better than, in my opinion, tapping a lady on the shoulder. The other thing you can do, specifically you're in places that have a little bit floor, you can, next to their foot, you kind of stamp a little bit on the floor. And then mostly the biggest thing that we do to get deaf people's attention, especially in a big environment, flip the lights on and off. And we'll go like this in the back, and the person will flip the lights. And most deaf people will stop talking and they'll look up to usually the front, right? Now, as we saw Sunday, deaf people like to talk, all right, and they will keep talking unless somebody stops them. If it's like in the middle of a service, you got to go and tap somebody. They would have kept talking, because that's just culturally they talk. They like to talk. And then once they're looking at each other in the eye, they're paying attention to each other, nothing happens here. They don't know preachers back up there singing the song. They have no idea. And because culturally, when you talk to somebody, you look them in the eye. And so I don't see somebody over here waving or moving like that. I'm focused on you. So to get the attention, I'm going to have to do something, tap, or I'm going to have to get in between them, and go like this, which is considered rude. Because I'm interrupting the conversation, with putting my hand in front of them. That's kind of rude. So Flip the lights would have been a way. Or somebody walk by and sit down, and they watch your movement. That can happen. Or you kind of tap on the floor next to them. Say, time to sit down. Normally, the interpreter usually would handle all that kind of situation. The interpreter would go, hey, all right. You know, that's usually what I did. You know, I see other interpreters do. All right, sit. Time to start again, and you start interpreting. And once you start interpreting, they see, oh, he's interpreting, so something's obviously happening up here now. And then everybody kind of quiets down, sits down, and starts paying attention. But that's don't worry about it. That's normal talking. If you're getting a deaf will sit there at a table all afternoon and just talk. And so when you start witnessing to a deaf person, do not expect to cut it short. All right? You're going to be talking to them. And they may ask you questions all over the place. I've had questions come out of left field. And I'm like, let's park that for a second. Hold on to that. Let me finish. And just kind of keep going. Because they'll want to talk, they'll want to do this, and they'll get distracted. Or if somebody comes, and this happens all the time too, they'll come up and tap them on the shoulder. And next thing you know, they turn around, they're having a conversation with their buddy. And you are now forgotten, and they're going to talk, and when they finish, they'll come back to you. They will come back. But it may take 10 minutes, and you got to be willing to understand that's how it works. That's the way deaf culture works. And so just be used to all that. So the way to get somebody's attention, gently tap on the shoulder. Again, my preference is guys tap a guy, lady tap a lady. If I have to get a lady's attention, I usually try to move in a place, not in the middle of their conversation, but where they could see me. It's like, hey, you know, I need your attention for a second. Something like that. Flip the lights. That's how you get a room full of attention. You can tap, like when you're at a table, or tap on the floor next to their foot. They can feel the vibration of that. I've done it where if a lady's sitting in a chair, I'll tap the back of the chair like that. And so they'll feel the vibration in the back of the chair and turn around. So I've done that. So it's just mostly you got it some way gently through a vibration normally to get their attention, or you flip lights or something like that. All right. So chapter review. I want you to think about, what is your reason for learning ASL? I know what your reason is. You have to. You don't have a choice. But what is your reason for learning ASL? All right, because we're about to have 15 weeks of class, and you're going to have to stay consistent. Okay? You're going to have to keep learning sign. You have to keep coming. You're going to have to practice. You're going to have to feel silly. At some point, you're going to be getting in front of the class and trying to sign a sentence. Yes. If your motivation is not enough to get that to happen, you know, you're not going to learn it very well. It's just going to be a little bit you're going to pick up here and there. You're going to get a couple words here and there. Make sure your motivation is set into place that this is something you really want. I don't want to discourage anybody from learning sign language. I want everybody to learn it. But if you want to really be able to witness to the deaf, you really want to have conversation with deaf, you're going to have to find that motivation. What is your motivation? And then, so what is ASL? Does anybody know? American Sign Language. All right. And who uses it to communicate? Deaf people and hearing people. A lot of people. All right. Americans specifically. Okay, so what are two ways to get a deaf person's attention? Tap the shoulder and some type of vibration. Whether the back of the chair, hit the table, top the floor. All right, so what are the 5 perimeters of a sign word? Does anyone remember the 5? Some people are flipping back in their book. Hand shapes, that's 1. Hand orientation or palm orientation, 2. Space, that's 3. Expressions. And movement. Very good. All 5, very good. That's the hardest part of lesson 1. All right, and now let me ask you, what is a sign name? Does anybody know? Who has a sign name? You have a sign name? What's your sign name? He doesn't have one. P going up like this, preacher for tall preacher, right? My sign name is JR on the palm. And Tammy's is Tammy. Now, a sign name is a sign that's your name, right? And it usually is something based on a characteristic about you. Right? Shani was a little girl when she got her sign name from, and you can only be given a sign name from a deaf person. You can't just give yourself a sign name. It's a cultural thing, right? It's like you've now been adopted into the community type thing. They will want to, and I heard one person said, that person said, what's your sign name? And he gave him the sign name. He goes, where'd you get it? And he said, I made it up. And he goes, well, that's not your sign name then. He goes, and he gave him a different sign name, and it was not a good one. So when you get a sign name from the deaf person. They'll usually give it to you. And it's going to happen as you start getting more conversation with deaf people. He's going to, what's your name? And as you have more conversations, he's going to be tired of having to spell your name, Jacob. And he goes, and he's going to watch you. Now, I got mine because I read a lot of books in college. Whenever I wasn't doing something else, I was reading. And every time a deaf person wanted to get my attention, they had to tap me. And they usually tap my book. And I had to look up. Well, so Jacob, because my face was always in a book, Jacob. Tammy's because she had little ringlets of her hair that would come down on the side of her head. That's hers. She was a baby when they gave her sign name. It says, beautiful, so they called her Shannon. Your sign name can change, too, depending on if you go to a new location. They're like, I don't like that sign name. I'm going to give you a different sign name. That can happen, and it's okay. And it's not your call. It's their call. So you're going to take whatever name they give you. Just make sure you make a good impression.
Do you now tell them? Show them?
Well, they asked me, what's my sign name? I said, JR. Well, where'd you get that? When I was at college, I was always reading a book, so the deaf people would have to tap my book. So they gave me that name. And they went, oh, that makes sense. And that's the name. John Barr, his sign's name, but a lot of it is about the heart, so he has a heart for the deaf. And Bruce Kelly also has a sign there. And then it's funny because this is Jim Braceland on the back. I don't know why, maybe church. I haven't asked him. But a lot of different people did a lot of different sign names. A lot of them are here at the heart or around the head. I know a man, that was his sign name. And then I know guys like Ed, it's just Ed. RJ, my friend from college we talked about, it's just RJ. He didn't have a sign name. That was his sign name. It was 2 letters. So it just kind of depends. Ethan has never gotten one because the deaf just never gave you one. I don't know why. All right, so the next chapter, deaf culture in the community. We're going to go through this real quick because honestly it's not that important for us to understand all this pieces here. But there is a cultural thing that happens within the deaf community that I want you to be aware of. There is something called a big D deaf. Okay? What this is a deaf person who has decided being deaf is perfectly normal. This is how God created me, and I'm perfectly happy with it. I don't need anything else. That's big D deaf. Most big D deaf don't use hearing aids. They are full ASL, our signs. Cultural, they don't care about the hearing culture so much. They're okay with hearing people. They're fine. We can have conversations, but I don't want hearing aids. I don't need hearing aids. I don't need any support. I don't need his help. I'm me. I'm going to be me. ASL, that's good. That's big D deaf. And then you have something called little D deaf. Little D deaf is somebody that has hearing aids or doesn't consider them part of the deaf culture. I put it that's more defining. They don't necessarily consider them part of deaf culture. They believe they're deaf, but they don't like that. They want to fix it in some way. They're, cochlear implants or hearing aids, or they don't know ASL completely. They do a lot more of reading lips, things of that sort. These are the people that like to be half in hearing culture, half in the deaf culture. And they're like in the middle here, right? And what you have is a problem now with big D deaf and little B deaf. They don't necessarily include each other as deaf. That he's not part of the deaf culture because he's got a cochlear or something like that. And then, so they don't like him. So you'll have those kind of issues. You'll see that kind of thing. For us, doesn't really matter. I don't care if you're full big D deaf and you think, God created you, perfect. Fine, I'm great. I have no problem with that. You are going to get a new body in heaven. I had a big D deaf that said he didn't want that. He thinks he's fine. He doesn't think he's broken. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. God made him the way he is. I understand that. And I understand having that concept. But God did say he was going to give us a glorified body. So if he makes you hearing in heaven, that's what it's going to be. It might happen. I can't promise you that you're still going to be deaf in heaven. And some don't like that. There are big D deaf, that are perfectly happy and they prefer to have their children born deaf. Hearing people are like, well, why would you want that? Well, they don't see anything wrong with being deaf. It's not a hindrance. It's not a handicap. So to them, they think it's a privilege to be deaf. It's a culture. And so they have that. And then you have over here where, little D deaf, they want to have hearing kids. Because they want to be more a part of the hearing culture. So you have a difference in culture there. And we just got to make sure that, as an interpreter or even talking to somebody, you can try to understand if they're big D deaf or little D deaf. Why? Because you don't want to ask questions that might offend them in a sense of, why don't you have a hearing aid? That might offend a big D deaf person. God can heal you. When you get to heaven, you're going to have a glorified body. You're focusing on that, and they don't want that. So you got to make sure when you're talking to this person, you're approaching it correctly. Little D deaf, you come up with full ASL, and they're like, go away from me. And sometimes you're going to have to bring down your signs, not be as ASL, be a little bit more, sign specific, something that I call pigeon sign. It's pigeon sign language. In America, you have ESL, PSL, and ASL. PSL is a mixture of English. English is exact signed English. And every word is exactly signed. They have articles the whole 9 yards. And that was what was taught back in the 50s to kids in school, in hearing schools. They were forced to learn exact sign English. And then we have deaf schools that were teaching ASL. And that kind of spread back out because that's where the culture was. That ESL is hearing culture applied to deaf, and ASL is deaf culture. And then you have something in the middle that's like a pigeon sign language. It kind of uses a little bit of both. Less classifiers, more words. And sometimes you have to do that. If you have a lower language, lower functioning deaf person, that you can't just go the nuclear option, right? And just, and they'll be like, I have no idea what you just said. You're going to have to read the deaf person you're with. A big D deaf, you don't want to offend in certain ways. Little D deaf, you don't want to offend them either. Because we're trying to get in and we're trying to win them to the Lord, and we can stick our foot in our mouth right off the bat. And now you're just the stupid hearing person. And sometimes you just, I'm done with you. And you don't even know what you did. So as you look at these different things, you can read this list, you see what they are, and as we get further in, you'll start seeing how to deal with those situations, right? And then we have something called hard of hearing. I believe PJ came here, right? Paul Mosley? So PJ was hard of hearing. So he could hear well enough, and if he put hearing aids on, he'd probably hear just as fine as a hearing person for the most part, right? There's a lot of hard of hearing people. And hard of hearing is specifically more on the hearing side of the world. They're really hardly ever involved in deaf culture. My mom's hard of hearing. She can't hear lower tones. So like if I don't, a lot of times if I don't raise my tone, she's got hearing aids now, but when I was younger, if I didn't raise my tone up and talk like this, she couldn't understand what I was saying. Anything down here, she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't hear you. So my mom's sort of hard of hearing. She's not deaf. She's not part of the deaf culture. She knows some sign language, but that we'll have people like that will meet, right? So we can't go up to them and start going even pidgin sign language. Now we're talking more just, I got to make sure I get it across clearly, and sometimes it's just volume. Like your dad. Yeah. My father-in-law, if his hearing aid isn't in, can't hear me. We have a deaf guy. We were at the conference. His mom and dad's deaf. His sister's deaf. He was sitting next to us. He's hearing. I know he was hearing because I heard him speak and talk and sign and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting next to him. I'm sitting on his right. And I go over and I say something to him, and he completely ignores me. I'm like, oh, he's a good kid. He wouldn't ignore me. So I say it again. Completely ignores me. Like, what in the world? Okay. I'm obviously misunderstanding something here. Maybe he's just focused, something like that. It was later on I found out he's deaf in this hearing. He's hard of hearing. I didn't know that. And so here I was thinking he was a hearing person. I was trying to have a conversation with him. I was sitting on the wrong side of him. And so I could have messed up and gotten angry with him because are you ignoring me? And he's not. He just didn't hear me. Even though he seemed fine, but he was hard of hearing. And so we got to make sure we're good with those situations as well. And so there's a lot of different deaf people in the United States. There's a lot of deaf community in a sense. We have socializations. Deaf like to socialize. Deaf like to talk. Deaf like to go to events and do things. That's why we started, the deaf Bible study. Because the deaf like to go do things. They like to be around other deaf, and they like to just sit and talk. There used to be a lot of organization and clubs. You used to be able to go to the deaf community center in the city and get a whole list of all the deaf people in the area. Because all the deaf people will sign up at the club. So you can get a whole list of names and addresses of every deaf person in the area because there was a club like that. Well, we don't have that necessarily anymore. Not really that I've seen. We have a lot of things that are on the internet, right? So we got Facebook groups and things of that sort. So if you want to start going to activities that are deaf-oriented, there's things like Deaf Night Out. There's a Daytona Deaf Night Out. There's a St. Augustine Deaf Night Out. The best thing for you to learn sign language and keep it retained is to go to places where there's lots of signing, to involve yourself in that culture. On the flip side, deaf culture is just like the hearing culture, and it's just like the rest of America right now. All right? There is a lot of things that are happening in deaf culture that we don't necessarily want to be involved in. So you need to be very careful with the things that you pick to go to because you might end up at something you didn't expect you were supposed to. You get there and you're like, oh, no, get in the car and go. All right? So that has happened. That has happened. So you got to be very careful with that. There's a thing called Deaf Pride. Like I said, the Big D Deaf power, man, all about it. So we have to be careful with the events and things that we go to. We want to go to events, but we got to make sure we're careful with what event we choose to go to. Like they had the one at the bowling alley here in Palm Coast, which is fine because we're just bowling. They had soda and pizza, but they had the rock music blaring the whole time, right? No deaf person was there for the rock music. They didn't hear it. So now I have to decide, am I going to go and communicate with them because they're all here. There's 40 of them here. I can talk with them all, but I got to put up with that. Earplugs, that works. You play the Christian music through your headphones because they can't hear it. They don't even know what's going on. But on the flip side, I don't go to bar events, right? I don't go to club events. I don't do things, but I kind of pick and choose what I go to. But some things, they didn't hear it. They don't hear that. They don't even know it's on. What am I going to go up to the front and say, can you turn the music down? I'm like, what? I thought you were here for the deaf event. All right, so then there's different things that the deaf communicate through. You used to have something called a TTY. I don't know if you ever saw that. They used to take the phone and put it on a typewriter. Right? And then you would type, and you could see what you were typing there. And it was sent off through the phone line to an operator who would then tell it to a person on the other end, hear what they had to respond, type it back through, and it'd go back and it would print on the screen what the operator was saying that the other person was saying. Okay, so you had that. That was old school. And I remember friends of mine would carry a case like this when they were getting ready to call home. Plop, open it up, like huge typewriter with a phone cradle in it. I was like, what is that? That's TTY. Now we have video phones. Now we have FaceTime. Now we have live streaming on Facebook. They also have video relay systems now, where you can actually call an interpreter and sign to her, and she can sign on the phone or talk to the person on the phone and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of nice stuff goes on with that. There are deaf people that are now becoming filmmakers. Have you seen this? They're becoming filmmakers, and they do film, and they're really good at it because, again, they're spatially aware. The way video works, they can just see this stuff. And they put the captioning into the video as part of the video. And so you'll have words flow in and get bold and disappear like this, and you can follow the whole story. It's very cool. Silent Word Ministry is actually putting together a cartoon that's full ASL that gives the gospel, all animated. It's taken a lot of hours to make sure can you imagine all the hand orientation has to be designed on every frame in there to be the right way. It took a lot of time. I think that's most of what I want to cover in here. Yeah, you can read through all that. There's a lot of all the different clubs and stuff, and it's just a bunch of information that if you want to read through that. If you flip over to page 119, we're going to go through our alphabet real quick and a couple times to make sure we got it down. And then you can practice that at home because we'll practice again next week our alphabet. Because again, the alphabet is very, very important. All right, ready? Everybody copy me. A. All right, B. B. Now, fingers together. Why? Because that's 4. So keep your fingers together. B. C. All hand orientations for alphabet is pointing out. Except for certain cases. We'll get there. See, D. Other way. D. There you go. Thumb. You did L. There you go. There. E. You'll see them in the book do something like this. I can't do that. Doesn't feel good on my fingers, so I do that. D, or E, F. Now again, I've seen it like this for F, and this was 9. So either way will be okay, but I prefer to close it because I'm very clear. F, G. So fingers are like this, so it looks like a little bit. You got to exercise. It's going to be exercise. Remember, palm orientation is forward. H, this is the only one where it's pointing towards you. Now, not peace. H. Okay. I. J. J. There you go. K. So it's like this where you got the, and then put it right on the knuckle. And then right toward the person. So K. Like this. Pointer finger up, middle finger down, and then thumb on the knuckle of the middle finger. Put your pinky down too. Point your middle finger out. There you go. As you practice. That's K. L. You should know this one because we all do this, right? Yeah. L. Facing out toward the other person. Except for H. So L, M. So you got 3 fingers over your thumb. M. Just 2 fingers over the thumb. It's M. O. Now, P is a K that fell over. It's like a gang sign. Right? So P is just K that tipped over. And then Q is just G that followed P. Q. So G, and then that's Q. So a flipped over G is Q. All right, R. R. S. McFist, S. T is one finger over your thumb. T. Now we get easy. U. U. V. W. X. Y. Z. Z. All right. What?
Am I writing it Z basically?
Yeah, you're just writing a Z. J is like this. So J is, yeah, thumb in, pinky out, and then turn it, where Y is both is out. So thumb in, turn is J. Thumb out, and keep it stable is Y. Y. So it's interesting because a little trick there. You learn I love you sign, right? Everybody knows the I love you sign? Do you know why that's I love you? I, L, Y. I love you. That's why it's like that. I, L, Y. This is the devil. So this is not I love you. Yeah. That's the devil. That's Satan. This is yeah, you don't want to do this one. And this one is llama. Right? It's llama. This is the devil. This is how we sign it here. This is how you would sign devil at a rock concert. But it is Satan. So, yes, the horns. All right, so let's try it again. We're going to go a little bit quicker. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. I knew a guy that could do that. One hand going one way, like A, B, C, and the other hand going Z, Y, the opposite direction. I'm like, no, thank you. I mean, how much practice you got to do? How much time did you waste practicing that? All right, so that is tonight's lesson. All right, you want to go over this finger spelling one more time? Or everybody feel like they're comfortable waiting at home? They'll do it at home. Brother Joe, you want to come up front and show everybody? No. All right, so next week we're going to review a little bit of the finger spelling specifically. We'll go back over our ABCs and all that fun stuff. And then we'll be covering lesson 3, pages up through page 77. Next week, we're going to be talking a lot about questions. How do we do questions? And then it goes into the 10 rules of grammar. And then we're actually going to be learning the syntax for ASL grammar. How do you put words in a sentence together? All right. Now, what I want you to practice specifically with spelling is your name. J-A-C-O-B. That's my name, R-O-T-H. When I spell it, I go J-A-C-O-B, R-O-T-H. I move it over because it's a different word. All right? And if you do it the deaf way, it's J-C-O-B. J-C-B. That's my name, J-C-B.
How do you differentiate when you switch words?
So J-A-C-O-B, R-O-T-H. I move over because one word, second word. So spell, stop, come over here, spell. Then you do it again. Yes. No. Just move over with it if you have to. Yeah, remember one word stays here. You don't have to go J-A-C-O-B like that. You just J-O-C-O-B, R-O-T-H. You know, you don't have to. Every letter doesn't move over. All right. Now, if you have like Larry, L-A-R-R-Y, the double R is a slide. So L-A-R-R-Y. That's how you do that. Or Hobbs, H-O-B-B-S. All right. So this S is an S. If you say H-O-B-B-S like this, you've actually made a plural. So now you're saying, are the Hobbs coming? So what I did is I said the plural. So I'm actually speaking, I spelled their name, but I actually meant all of them. And so you got to be careful about swapping the hand orientation. So S is hand orientation is that way when we're spelling. If you turn it, you made a plural out of it. So learn your spell your name. With your last name. The good news is I can't spell. So I won't know if you mess up. I will just know if the letter you formed looks right. I can't tell if you spelled Malinowski, right? I would have no idea. So you can spell it any way you want to. Just make sure the letters you form are correct. All right, and then look over next week's lesson. There are a lot of sentences. As we get further along, we're going to start doing those sentences in conversation amongst each other. So get used to reading them over, what the sentences are. Practice those sentences. Because as we get into this, we're going to be doing that more often as part of our dialogue. We're going to have conversations in here. When we get to a certain point, I may not be using my voice anymore. All right? So, and I'll go slow, and I may add my voice, and I may just go straight sign with gloss. And so it's going to get generally harder, so practice during the week. All right? No, it's 3 through page 77, I believe is what the syllabus says. All right, because there's a lot in there. There's 10 rules. We're not even going to get through the first 2 or 3 next week. So the syllabus will tell you what we should cover exactly. And then as we get up to the Romans road, we should have enough vocabulary to start learning that signs of what the Romans road has in the verse, et cetera, as we go through that. All right, so let's pray. So Heavenly Father, God, I thank you for the opportunity to teach a class on ASL. Lord, I pray you help. I pray you help imprint on our hearts the desire to learn this language, that we're doing it as unto you. We're doing it for a reason, to win deaf people to you. That we can communicate and be friendly and invite them to church, that we can win their heart and get them into church, Lord, that they come to know you. And I pray you help us each one as we practice, as we learn, that we apply ourselves, that you help our minds stay young and learn it all and remember all these things, Father, because I know you have the power to do that. In your Son's precious name, amen.